Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining another episode of the Muslim Philanthropy Podcast. Today, I am Muhi Khwaja, and every day, typically. I'm joined with an esteemed colleague and friend, Hussein Rashid, who is a PhD, is a founder of Islamicate, which is a L3C, a consultancy focusing on religious literacy and cultural competency. He works with a variety of NGOs, foundations, nonprofit organizations, and governmental agencies for context expertise on religion broadly, with a specialization on Islam. He's currently serves as Assistant Dean of Religion and Public Life at the Harvard Divinity School. Welcome, Hussein.
Assalamu alaikum, Muhi. Thank you.
Wa alaikum assalam. So I know there's a lot of different projects that you're involved with and a lot of great things that you do on a wide variety of things. So first, before we get into all of that, I want to hear more about who you are as a person, the ins and outs, where you grew up, kind of where you built your thought process and your family life, and then we can
Yeah,
get education and career as well. So
sounds good.
take it away.
So I'm a New York boy. I grew up born and bred Queens, New York. Currently split my time between Manhattan and Cambridge. So I'm still really, I joke, how vampires have to travel with a bit of their soil of home with them. I travel with a little bit of soil of New York with me when I travel, so I can sleep
Yeah.
properly. I grew up in Queens, then moved to Long Island. And I think I learned a lot about community and service to community and how being Muslim is not just about ritual, but that belief has to turn into a practice that's beyond ritual, but like it being in service to others. I'm Shia, so I think that's intrinsic to a lot of the way we view the world theologically, but also witnessing my own mother and my mother's extended family is the one that was in New York when I was growing up. um, is watching my mother and her sisters really work in the community, creating spaces for domestic violence survivors to find support, working in mediation and arbitration, uh, creating systems for parents to get together and figure out like how do you navigate a school system in a new country, because these were immigrant parents, and sharing their learnings and trying to teach each other, and making sure everybody wasn't reinventing the wheel. So like this idea that you're obligated to people who I think we sometimes tend to overlook or want to overlook, and also to your peers, and to think across generations. So it was something I was really saw a lot growing up in the service and the seva and the khidmat that they did. That was really formative for me. So it wasn't just the theory of theology, but the really seeing the practical impact of that all.
Yeah, and I'm glad you share that because, thinking about my own experience, it a lot revolves around how I saw my parents help establish a community. They came as immigrants in the 70s, and started off in New York and then relocated to Michigan. And a lot of that was them navigating the challenges and experiences of their own life and finding people who are in a similar capacity, to start communities that they kind of built from the ground up. So, kudos to your family and your mom for helping others right away and finding a place where they could sink their feet into and establish a network.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to be clear, I mean, I saw my dad do it as well, but it was really my mom and her extended family doing that work. Just and anybody thinks it's, a gendered service is a gendered
No,
thing. It's fundamental.
sure. Right on. And then, so growing up, you had that experience in New York. Where did you end up going to school and kind of defining your own kind of ethos and
Mm,
impact?
it's, um, I'm gonna talk just a little bit about high school, which was on Long Island, predominantly or shifting demographic in the community, where most of my friends ended up being Black, coming from different parts, some African American, some from the Caribbean. Um, and I say this because I think I was a teenager several decades ago, and but at a time in the United States where, as a child of immigrants, it was not cool to be different. And, being the only Muslim, one of maybe two Muslim kids in a high school of about 800 students, was difficult. Um, and also, part of that discourse that religion is not cool overall, let alone Islam, right? So like sort of rejecting what your parents gave you, whether it was food or language, but also religion, and not having a sense of what it meant for me to be Muslim, as a teenager, and having sort of inherited it from my parents. And I've never knowingly had a drink of alcohol, but for a period in high school, which in Long Island has a very big drinking culture, part of that was being with my friends who were Black and who saw questions of alcohol through a racial justice and a social justice lens rather than as a theological lens. It's a poison, it's a corruption within the community. And it was how I was introduced to Malcolm X, not as a Muslim, but as a uh, thinker for building community and engaging me with ideas of liberation and justice that resonated deeply with me as somebody who was familiar with the teachings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and those notions of justice, and then getting into Malcolm's Islam as well within that. And so I'm laying this as a foundation that when I come into college, I'm not sure where I fit in as a Muslim. I'm still trying to figure out what it means for me to be Muslim. Still being ritually observant as it strikes me. But I had, so I went in, kid of immigrants. We have certain career options that are laid before us, right? It's the doctor, it's the engineer, right? So I was pre-med, and I was actually really interested in biology. I'm still very intellectually excited by that space.
Mhm.
But I had to take, as I was pre-med, bio major, had to take the humanities distribution. I was at Columbia University, and I took an Intro to Islam course because I thought, hey, I'm Muslim, Intro to Islam course, easy A. And I had the most amazing professor, a man by the name of Peter Aoun, who recently passed away, God rest his soul. Um, Grew up Christian. I'm not sure how he identified later in life, but he was able to academically explain to me what my parents had been, the life my parents had been living, which is like, there's all this diversity in what it means to be Muslim. There's different ways of expressing devotion. There are ways that service has to show up in your life in whatever capacity. And looking at this from a historical lens, looking at this from a cultural lens, which is what Peter On was offering me, really helped me intellectualize some of the things that I'd been rejecting as for a sense of acceptance for people who still weren't accepting me. And it gave me actually the space and the language, the intellectual headspace and the language to start trying to figure out what an Islam of my own looked like to me and trying to make something of that. And so I reverted a lot back to my family's idea of service, and really got involved in doing service for the Muslim community in New York and around Columbia. This was, for those of us of a certain age, we may remember the Salafi wars on MSAs on campus. We were in that, and you're nodding your head to this, so I'm sure you
Yeah.
experienced some of that, and thinking about who are all the Muslims that are not being serviced in
Right.
this.
Right.
And how do we build together, and how do we create community? And so that was really sort of my first, where I had a sense of ownership on doing something for Muslims that wasn't sort of inherited or wasn't already there, that I was plugging into, and thinking about what does an Eid celebration look like that is in fact an expression of joy, that is an actual Eid, right? Rather than just here's namaz and then you're done, but really thinking about we're Muslim and what does it mean to be Muslim, and wearing that with pride and moving forward. And so that led me, because of my exposure to Peter, he guided me to a whole bunch of other really great professors who were teaching religion. And I went through, finished my biology degree, did my MCATs, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do medicine at that point anymore. And the advice I got from Peter and several others was go and do this 2-year master's at Harvard Divinity School, master's in theological studies. See if that feels right for you. And I did, and the master's was very difficult. This was, as I said, several decades ago. This was before we had places like Hartford Seminary, or Bayan doing these sort of like, what does it mean to be Muslim in Christian seminary spaces? And so I didn't have that network, I didn't have that support. But I found the intellectual challenge, the idea of studying about Islam and deepening my intellectual knowledge, being able to articulate to other people, and the way it reflected in the development of my own iman and my own faith and my own spirituality, my own devotional practice was deeply profound, right? The ability that mind and spirit and body are working together. Again, very, very resonant with teachings I'm familiar with as a Shia. But to finally figure out what that meant for me in practice and lived experience was really great. And then I went on to a PhD in Islamic studies. My work was in Qawwali in America. Qawwali is a South Asian devotional art form. And what it looked like for children of immigrants in the US and how they use it. But, 9/11 happened while I was working on my PhD. And so here's this kid born and bred in New York, working on a PhD in Islamic studies. Like, everybody wanted to get in with me. I was deeply influenced by the work of Edward Said, who's known for Orientalism, and rightfully so, but he also wrote another book called Covering Islam, where he talks about the narratives of Islam in the United States operating in academia, government, and media, and how they sort of work together because they're the same social class. They're people who all went to school together. They're all telling the same stories, and they're working towards this larger narrative of what it means to be Islam. So the Islam they're engaging with is not actually a real Islam, but is an imagined Islam for some other end. Like, we'll tell you, at this point, thinking about the second Iraq invasion in 2003, we're going to tell you the Sunnis and Shias have been at war for years. It's the same way they told us Iran and Iraq was a Sunni Shi'i war, even though both countries are predominantly Shi'i, right? It's that same sort of imagination of what Muslims are that was happening. So trying to insert myself in those spaces, and I found myself really being able to create space by virtue of my education, like being able to swing around a Harvard PhD, got me access into rooms, and trying to hold that door open for other people. But that was sort of my entryway into spaces outside of academia. That got me thinking about, where could I make an impact in a meaningful way while still being a teacher, because I love education. Like that, if you ask me at my core, I am an educator. And so treating all these spaces as educational spaces, and how do I engage with that? And how do I teach? And that was, that was life altering for me.
Mm-hmm. So going from a student to being academic, and now are you also teaching currently, or are you?
I am both an administrator and a faculty member. Yeah.
So as faculty, what are some of your favorite classes that you've been able to teach over the last few semesters?
I created a course that I'm itching to get back to. It probably won't show up in cycle for another couple of years, but I created a course on jinn stories.
Very
And looking at it was
some people have already stopped listening at this point. There's a jinn, I'm out of here.
right, exactly. Like, I'm not summoning them. I haven't said it 3 times fast.
Yeah.
I'm breaking it up, there's no lamp in front of me.
I'm gonna start reading my charcoals.
Yeah, exactly. But looking at ideas and stories of the unseen, and what do stories of the unseen tell us about Muslim understandings of the world? Really intellectually, where I've been pushing in 2 ways. One, how do we teach about religion in ways that aren't so Christian centric? But the other thing that I've really been pushing into is, how do we understand Muslims in their own terms, rather than trying to say this is what we think Muslims believe, but taking not quite an anthropological approach, but really looking at Muslim texts and trying to say, what are they trying to tell us about Muslim life in this time period? So if you read a jinn story from, let's say, Sevan Sharif in modern day Pakistan from the 15th century, I think it has very different meaning than a jinn story from Sevan Sharif today in the 21st century. And they're speaking to different realities and different concerns. And so trying to look at this and see what are Muslims concerned about, and also taking them seriously, that jinn are real, right? And that this is something we also have to take seriously. We can't say it's just an explanation, but that Muslims consider jinn to be real. So how do you manage that, and how do you engage with that? And I think students find it, and I have to be clear, a lot of my students, most of my students are not Muslim, right? Because I teach at universities
Hmm.
where Muslims are not the majority. And they find the material fascinating as narrative and challenging is way because it challenges the way they view the world and they're used to seeing the world. So that's always been, that course has been really exciting for me to think about how to do that. And I was very conscious. I made sure I only chose jinn stories written in English because I don't want stuff to be lost in translation. And I was surprised how much I had. I thought I'd be struggling, and I was like, oh no, I've actually got to choose and like cut down, which is a really nice thing to have.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I remember just like anecdotally around like campfires and, things like that with
Yep.
stories being shared and things even happening at other camps that I've heard of. So, there's always the real element to it. And, people often think it's just this like other realm, which it is, but it's also very integrated. So it's interesting to see like what is anecdotal, what is factual, and the emphasis around that.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Um, so tell me a little bit more about like student life at Harvard and how you are engaging the students as an administrator as well.
Yeah, a lot of my work focuses, so our program is called Religion and Public Life, and what we do is we try to train students who are master's students to take their study of religion and engage the world with it. Basically, how do we formalize and institutionalize the types of things I had to learn on my own when I was a student here. The program is headed by a woman named Diane Moore, who is a mentor of mine, and which is a relationship that brought me back to Harvard after many years away. And so a lot of my time is spent with students on thinking with them on engaging the world. Where do they see themselves making an impact? We have an internship requirement if they want to work in our program, if they want to get a certificate in our program. So thinking with them about internships and developing that internship, helping them navigate and figure out where that is. We've had people write articles for major city newspapers, working on PBS documentaries, writing modules on Sharia for the International Red Cross. So, the advantage of being at a place like Harvard is that we get access. We have really talented students, and I say this, I've taught in a lot of places. I've always had talented students. Um, and I'm not saying one place is better than another. So I want to be clear about that. It's not a comparison of students, but these students are talented. They do these amazing things with these internships, and trying to help them understand then what happens after you graduate. Like, what does this look like out in the world? Because you're not going to be the religion person. You're going to go into a newsroom where there's no longer religion beats, but religion permeates everything. You're going to be working in a corporate environment, and do you show up in a diversity office, or are you doing some other thing with the employee interest group? Uh, and helping them just trying to figure out what happens. What does this mean? We're a constructed environment in doing this. What does this look like out in the real world? And helping them also think through the types of things that I did and continue to do that they can hopefully find some meaning and learning from to bring into their life after they leave the school environment.
Definitely. I think having that type of mentorship and engagement within a program is super critical because, I have friends who've gone on to masters and PhDs, but sometimes they don't have outside of academia an idea of what they can do with their research, what they can do with their interests. So many of them end up staying in academia and teaching, but maybe don't go outside of that realm to see how can they make a further impact outside of it as well. So it's good to have these practical ideas, and this internship maybe is really well placed in different institutions like NPR and International Red Cross and other places where they can see a real life impact as well.
That's exactly right. And I think one of the things, to your point about going on to academia because you don't see anything else, I think one of the things I learned is I'm a content expert. I have a PhD, I have a lot of content expertise.
Yeah.
But that's not what people are hiring me for outside of academia. They're hiring me for my methodological expertise. In other words, what is the problem that you have that I can help you solve? And that doesn't come from matching your needs to my content. It's matching my skills and my methods to your needs and figuring out what a correct uh, resolution for you is. And if I can, I'll talk a little bit about, one of the projects I'm really most proud of having contributed to is the Children's Museum of Manhattan did an exhibit called America to Zanzibar, Muslim Cultures Near and Far. And I sort of started out on the advisory board. Because of the work I was doing on the advisory board, I became their lead content consultant. And then because I knew people in the American Muslim community in New York, I helped them with community engagement. I worked with their education team, and really thinking about how do we tell the story of diverse Muslims in this space across time, across space, without making it an Islam 101, right? So we were really intent on talking about Muslims. We didn't want to do like, here's what it means to be Muslim, because we were inevitably going to lock somebody out, intentionally or otherwise, and we would have to make decisions. And that's not a position we wanted to be in. This wasn't a theological exhibition. This was about telling the story of Muslims and how Muslims saw themselves. And so if we did a wall on what a mosque is, we did mosques from China, from West Africa, from the United States, from Iran, from South Asia, right? And we did this whole spread, so you get this diversity, but we were hoping nobody would feel left out. And then we did like a market bazaar. So we were very conscious of which regions of the world we were also trying to cover. Like, so we couldn't hit every country in the world, but were we hitting, communities in East Asia, Southeast Asia, East Africa, West Africa, right? And we were trying to, obviously there's the Arab world has historical meaning to Muslims, but in terms of population, it's relatively small. So how do we tell this diverse story? And then we did a lot of work around, we had this place called the American Living Room. So what does an American Muslim living room look like? And we had these great objects, like people gave us stuff, like the first Muslim mayor in New Jersey gave us the Quran he got sworn in on. We had an NPR reporter who gave us the clothes she wore out of the house to please her parents and the clothes she was actually wearing at high school when she got in. We had stuff from the Worth Deen Muhammad community. We had stuff from the Nation of Islam, stuff that had never been seen before, because this was our community, right? And our community came out to support this and said, this is our story, tell our story. And I think one of our greatest moments of affirmation came when Muhammad Ali, God rest him, when he came to visit when he was alive, was so enamored of the exhibition that he sent us things from his museum to put in the exhibition.
Okay. That's really cool.
And that is just, how much more of a validation can you get than that? But I will end with one story out of that exhibition that I really loved. So we had this bazaar, it's this long hallway. And on one end of the hallway, we had this space for Petit Senegal. So in New York and Harlem, there's an area where there's a lot of Senegalese Muslims. It's called Petit Senegal. And there are a lot of dressmakers and tailors there. So the kids' play area was playing dress up, and the patterns were given to us by people from the neighborhood, and we recreated in this durable fabric. But we worked with them, and we had their stories up on the wall. And then on the other end of the hallway, we had a Zanzibari fishing station where you could be like fishing in Zanzibar. And I remember this woman came up to me and she said, "You don't understand how much this exhibition means to me." And I said, "Are you Muslim?" And she said, "No, my husband is." She said, "But my husband is from Zanzibar and I'm from Senegal. And there's no way for us to talk about our kids and the relationship except when we come here." Right. And so thinking about that impact that this has for even people who aren't Muslim and the way we tell those stories, you don't get any better than that.
That's really neat. And yeah, I think art just has a special way to connect to people's experiences without it, necessarily words being said. So kudos to you and the team for putting on that exhibit.
Yeah, no, I wish I could take credit for starting it, but I'm very grateful they brought me on and gave me the space they did.
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other avenues in which we've intersected.
Yeah.
We're both part of the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute, amicably, out of University of South California. And I'm like one of the more recent alumni from that, even though I did it several years ago. I
Mhm.
think I was like cohort 13 or so,
Okay.
but you're one of the more early on. So I want to get your take in terms of your experience with amicably and engagement through it and the growth that you've seen amicably take as well.
Yeah. I was part of the last national cohort, which was cohort 5. So there's a bit of a gap. Um, and I want to put this out there before people start thinking I'm like a grandfather. There wasn't actually 8 years between cohort 5 and cohort
Oh,
13. There were multiple cohorts running simultaneously.
correct, correct.
So I just want to be clear, I'm not 20 years older than Muhi. Before people are like, "Oh, who's this old man?" Um, I love Amicably because of its commitment to take Muslims as they are and meet the needs that they have, particularly in terms of civic leadership. As you mentioned, it's in the title. We come from various industries that are trying to serve, and industry sounds so corporate and so professional, but so from various sectors, social sectors, philanthropy, academia, community organizing, business, arts. This is all part of our civic life. And trying to figure out, how do we talk to each other? How do we build together? How do we meet our needs when so many of us, particularly in the nonprofit NGO world, are under-resourced and struggle with that, whether it's in terms of capital, whether it's in terms of human resources, and often those are combined, as you know. Um, and how do we celebrate ourselves? And I love that attitude, right? Because we should celebrate ourselves. I don't, I'm not entirely sure you and I would have intersected without Amply. And I think we've done some interesting things together as a result, not least of which is this podcast we're doing right now. Um, but I think just those conversations, just that thinking, even if we hadn't created anything, I know that I'm a better thinker because of the conversations you and I have had and all the other conversations I've had with other Amicably folk. And we need to have those catalytic moments, those catalytic structures, right? And the ability that when one of us succeeds, like everybody comes rushing out and is like, "Great, wonderful, Mubaraki, Alf Mabruk," like the whole spread of things. Um, and to know that if nothing else, you will always have like 150 people ready to swarm you and congratulate you when the best happens, and 150 people ready to swarm and support you when you say you need the dua for some struggle that you're facing. Right. And that's a powerful, powerful way to move throughout the world.
Definitely. I love the way that you put it because, um, you know, my cohort was maybe 12 people or so. But it was exactly that. As soon as we kind of went through our program, being introduced to the rest of the alumni, and then seeing it as other cohorts have come through the process as well, It really is a well-connected, well-resourced group, very diverse backgrounds. You have people in the education space, the government space, the nonprofit space, the art space, and like you said, maybe wouldn't have intersected otherwise. And I think that's so critical for these people who often may feel like they're in silos,
Mhm.
to be brought together and showcase that they have a network of support that's just built in, has been really great.
And I should mention, because you mentioned Amicly, is that when I talked about the Children's Museum exhibit and like Muslim communities showing up, that's because I put out a call to Amicly and said, I want your community here. And people were like, yeah, let's do this, right? And there's no way I could have reached out to 20. I mean, I could have, but the amount of time and effort it would have taken for me to reach out to 20 communities and build that trust, as opposed to me reaching out to Amicly and saying, you have this trust. Tell me what the story is for me to tell here, and showing up. It reduced my workload, but also means we got these great stories that there's no way I would have gotten on my own.
Definitely. Um, I want to shift into some of the other projects that you're involved with as well.
Yeah.
One being the American Muslims film,
Yeah.
going to be on PBS soon. So tell us a little bit more about the different documentaries. And AMCF held a webinar earlier this year about it as well. So some people may be familiar with the work, but for those that don't know about it, please do share more.
Yeah. So, Muhi, what you're referring to is American Muslim Stories. This is going to be a multi-hour, multi-format documentary series on the history of Muslims in the United States. So our first launch is actually going to be with PBS Digital. It's going to be an online format rather than broadcast. We are about halfway through, we're sorry, three-quarters of the way through filming now, of the first sequence of films we want to shoot. Um, there's a lot I want to tell you about it, and I have to be a little bit cautious because I also wanted to be surprised for people who don't know about the project. But our commitment is to tell a diversity of stories of Muslims to showcase uh, the breadth and depth of our community and include a mix of well-known stories as well as stories that people haven't heard of before. So we are going to talk about, let's say, Umar ibn Sayyid, who was an individual who, right now, we have his autobiography. We believe it is the earliest autobiography written by an enslaved Muslim in Arabic here in the United States. And I think his story in certain circles is fairly well known, but it opens up all these other avenues for exploring stories. And again, this is where I want to keep it a little bit circumspect because I want people to come into this and really be surprised and immerse themselves in what we have to offer rather than me like giving little dribs and drabs and you doing your Wikipedia searches. And I want you to be on the journey with us that we're planning for you. But I'm really excited by that. And part of and it's this confluence. So I worked on as a consultant on the opera for Omar, which won a Pulitzer Prize. I wish I wrote the section that said, "Hey, the Pulitzer Prize can be loved." I didn't. I'm not going to take credit for it, but I was one of the content consultants behind it, and we were able to then connect with that creative team to help shape our narrative. Right. So there are these moments where, when you show up, I'm a firm believer when you show up, it attracts good. When you show up for the good, it attracts the good. Uh, so that's one of the big projects. Super excited working with director Graham Judd and EP Zahir Ali and Metha Al Hassan. So it's a really great group of individuals working on this. I also worked on a documentary that won an award for religion reporting for the New York Times on the secret history of Muslims. That was with Smarty Pants Productions. Some people may be familiar with Smarty Pants because they did a whole series called The Secret Life of Muslims.
Right.
Right. So this was sort of like it's an animated op doc, but it's sort of to like give some context to the whole series. And Josh Saftel, who is the one of the principals there, his documentary on Stranger at the Gate was a short documentary that was Oscar nominated this last year. And it was based on the secret life of Muslims. So not my documentary, but part of that series.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I mean, just some amazing talent out there who are willing to work with American Muslims in getting their stories out and helping us develop pipelines. And I think that's the important thing, right? Is that I work with these people because they're good people as people, but they're also good professionals. And they
Right.
also recognize that there's a different tenor when people are telling their own stories versus when they're acting as translators. So being committed to that idea of pipeline development is fantastic.
Hmm. So, a lot of your engagement maybe started with being at Harvard in terms of being able to be welcomed into certain spaces and acknowledged for your expertise. And other parts was, learning about opportunities like Amically. What would you say to somebody who is listening and wanting to get involved in these circles, in these spaces, part of these conversations so that they can make similar impact? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity, Muhi. It's coming back to this idea of generational shifting. One thing I will say is I wasn't necessarily welcomed in spaces because I was at Harvard or because I had the Harvard degree, but I could use the Harvard degree to break down doors.
Sure.
And sometimes you have to put yourself in spaces. Uh,
Thank you for
you're not
clarifying
always
that.
going to be welcomed. So I just,
Sure.
but I think that leads into the question you're asking, which is what advice would I give? I think for me, this is 2020 hindsight. If you'd asked me while I was in the midst of it, I wouldn't have given you this answer. So I'm telling you, reflectively. Uh, I'm telling you reflectively now, having had some distance and some time, is think about what you're bringing to the table. Just saying, I have a degree or I studied with so and so is not enough. That's not understandable to anybody else. What you're offering is your knowledge and your expertise. So ask yourself, what is the knowledge and expertise I bring? But if you stop there, it's about you and your nafs. It's about your ego. It's about your pride. So the next question is, with this knowledge and expertise I have, what good can I bring into the world? And who am I serving? And I think that that gives you the ability to focus and say, this is the change that I need to see in the world. This is how I have that knowledge and expertise to bring that change into the world. And then you think about where can I offer this and what spaces do I need to be in order to be able to do that. I think networks are huge. The more people you know, and I don't mean in a transactional way, I think really being open and responsive. And Muhi, I'm going to call out yours and I relationship because you already said it, right? Like I speak to you once, speak to you maybe once
Yeah,
every 2 years, if that, right? But if there's something I see on a group email chain that it's coming from you, A, I make sure I read it, and B, if there's something I can offer, I always try to make sure that I can offer it or point to you in that direction. I know you do the same for me.
likewise. Yeah,
And so, right, it's not necessarily transactional. It's just like we're in community, you have to nurture that community. That doesn't always mean being engaged with that person, but it means respecting that person. It's not transactional. I'm not looking for anything from you when I do that. It's your success and my success are bound together. So how do we do that good together, whether it involves me or not? So I think this is really the best bit of advice I think I've learned is just network, not in a transactional sense, but in the idea that you are building community. And what does that look like? Because that also helps you, I think, figure out what the good is. Because you know then what's possible. I don't know what's possible until I meet somebody who's doing it or somebody who says, this is done. This is something I can build. Or going off in other directions. I had a phone call this morning with somebody. We're part of a fellowship. We've chatted a few times. We like each other. She calls me. She says, look, I've got this idea. I just need to talk it through. Would you be willing to talk it through with me? Yeah, sure. No problem. At the end of this 40-minute call, we have created this joint project that we want to launch together. I'm keeping it under wraps because inshallah it'll be good and big. But it wasn't part of anybody's agenda. She just needed a thought
right.
partner, part of that network. And it's like, yeah, this is how you do this thing. And she's like, but now I need a partner and you seem like the right partner. Are you interested? I'm like, yeah, actually, I'm really interested in this if you'll have me. So there is that idea that you don't know what's there until you build that community of trust.
Definitely. And, I think going back to the idea of what purpose people can serve, and hopefully not serving their own ego, but being part of a larger collective good that can help advance, whether that's the Muslim community at large or even just people who are doing great work and being part of telling that story. So much comes from the idea of our faith, but I would also hope and expect that people would want to be good regardless of their faith, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of great insightful reminders that you've shared and that I'm appreciative of. I want to give you another opportunity to share anything else that you're part of, that we didn't get to cover, and things that you're excited about and things that you are looking forward to.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna plug the space I'm in right now. I love this position I have in religion and public life. If any of your listeners are interested and how religion shows up in the world and want to think about that in an active way and are interested in a master's, reach out. I'd love to talk to you, and think about what this means and what it looks like. And this isn't true just for the youngins. I feel like at least I'm old enough to say that, but for people like us, we do offer a master's for senior people who are thinking about what is their, who want to make an impact in their field because they're in such a position. And we have that, and trying to create that space and those conversations. So I'm going to plug that. Please check out American Muslim Stories. We are ongoing with that. So do look at that for us. And I think the last reflection that I'll offer is I've been thinking a lot about the word sadaqah, and we think about sadaqah as charity or charitable giving. But when you think about it as its root, it's about friendship, it's about justice, it's about reciprocity. And it's, for me, I've just been thinking a lot about this word because for me, if I think about one word right now that expresses the Islam that I'm trying to bring, it is sadaqah. It's about relationships. It's about justice. It's about social change. It's not about charity. I don't want to give things away. I shouldn't have that much to give away to begin with. But I want to create a world where there's no need for me to give anything away. And that's because I see in every bit of creation God reflected back, right? And that's the type of world we want to create. And so that's just where I'm at right now, and I want to offer that as a final reflection.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, because even in the hadith we hear that sadaqah is a smile, right?
Yeah,
The smile is charity. And one last question that I'll ask, is, in this intersection of sadaqah, philanthropy, philanthropy is largely defined as the love of mankind, the love of
right.
humanity, right? Where is it in the intersection of, religion and philanthropy that you kind of see spaces going? It doesn't have to be regarding foundations and philanthropic money support, but it could just be in the sense of the everyday life of people in how they engage with humans. Do you have any more thoughts on just that intersection of religion and sadaqah?
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that question because I think philanthropy in English, as you said, is about the love of mankind, love of other people, which I think is an admirable goal. But if you think about it, we don't have, as Muslims, don't have an equivalent, right? If you think about zakat, it's purification. If you think about sadaqah, it's relational, it's justice oriented. Um, that embedded in it is a love of God's creation, of humanity, but as part of a social net. It's not a one-on-one relationship. It is a one-on-many relationship. It is a many-on-many relationship. And for me, I think if we were to engage with this thoughtfully and intentionally as Muslims, I would like to see us advance that argument that philanthropy, we are in a society where capital is important, and I'm not going to discount that, but it is the smile. It is about the social giving. It is about the service. All these things are in fact philanthropy, but philanthropy from a Muslim perspective. And thinking about, we love humanity, not man. We love humanity because God tells us to love humanity and because we love
Right.
God. So how do we engage with that seriously?
I love that thought point, and so much to consider, and a good place for us to put a pin in the conversation so that other people can reflect on what philanthropy means to them and how that plays a part in their lives. So, Hussein, I want to thank you again so much for joining the Muslim Philanthropy Podcast today, and looking forward to all of the wonderful things that you'll continue to do and keeping an eye out for the projects that you're involved in.
Thanks so much, Muhi, for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Salams.
Bye, Hassan.